Thank you everyone for joining us today. Excited to be here to share this project. Since this is an unbuilt project and the award that we got last year was a citation award for equitable communities. We want to share the values and the story behind the project, along with the cool flashy renderings and the design, which we all love to see. So we're going to present this kind of as almost like journal entries of our process and up to where we are today, and then we're going to end with what's next for this project, La Semilla. So I'm Brandon Blakeman. I am the founding principal of Workshop B Architects. We are based in Portland and in San Diego. This project is in San Diego, which is exciting to share with people outside of the area. And co-presenting this with Ben Arcia, who really is an urban designer, but also a landscape architect, which I love. But we decided to present this together because we found that our personal stories and the story of La Semilla were sort of woven together, and we sort of harnessed that to bring volume and space to this idea that our client had for this project. So we thought we'd start with a bit of personal stories and how that formed our approach. My research, both in academia and in the profession, has largely been centered on this idea that architecture is really a platform for human engagement. I'm not the only one who thinks of this. I don't want to take full credit for it, but it's really powerful when it can be a catalyst for social and cultural change. And that for me is rooted in living and working in communities where people didn't always have a voice, or there wasn't always a space. And then for me, that was reinforced through working prior to starting Workshop B, working on education projects and public projects with firms that really shared the same value. And so as I started with Workshop B, and as we progressed through the evolution of our company, this is really at the forefront of our projects and continues to be an important research topic for me. So go ahead, Ben.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. I'm originally from Miami. I ended up in San Diego about 11 years ago by accident because I was moving to San Francisco and my car broke down here. And I'd studied urban design. I went to work for a landscape architecture company, fell in love with plants, at least from a design standpoint. But then I got introduced to permaculture because I lived in an apartment and I wanted to grow weed on my balcony. And it turned into tomatoes, it turned into eggplants and green beans. Started a garden, and before I knew it, we were off to South America working on permaculture farms in 6 different countries over the course of a year and a half, figuring out where we could plug into permaculture and where agricultural education could plug into the greater world. And the conclusion after all that traveling and learning and working was realizing that it was right to come back to San Diego and see how we could apply permaculture at the scale of infill and also at the urban design scale. So I rejoined McCullough again, and we're La Semilla kind of came from my side of it, from all those experiences, kind of pushing in towards this one mission to make it something that's accessible for people.
And I think what was great about this and why we both pursued this project together is we were introduced through a mutual mentor and started having these larger conversations around both of these ideas, and it sort of manifested into this project kind of serendipitously. So that's why we're here today. Wrong thing. Let me flip here. Okay. So our first sort of journal entry, or where we want to start with this project, is why La Semilla, and why is it happening now? And to understand why this particular project is happening now in the community of San Ysidro, we thought it was appropriate to sort of layer together um, recent, even micro to macro events that are reshaping communities, social justice movements, income disparity, immigration, both legal and illegal, catastrophic climate events. These are all sort of occurring at the same time, while there's also this increased awareness or demand for climate resilient strategies in the built environment. And it's now being supported by like advancing technologies like mass timber and prefabrication, and becoming more accessible to a broader range of communities and builders. And so,
I just want, do you mind if
yeah,
I add to that?
please.
Just the idea being that La Semilla is a product of large forces and not so much necessarily a design exercise as it is just kind of a manifestation of where everything's moving at the same time.
And so to understand San Ysidro as a community, it helps to look at San Diego. San Ysidro is part of the city of San Diego. It is not its own incorporated city, um, and it's physically disconnected from the rest of San Diego. The highlighted areas on this map are the boundaries of the city of San Diego. It's physically disconnected. I think there's apparent reasons for this, in no small part because it is the community that abuts the U.S.-Mexico border. So there's questions around control of the border, revenue, access, etc. Um, and then if we zoom in even more, um, we look at this area that is also next to the busiest border crossing in North America, and the fourth busiest crossing, I believe, in the world. About 60,000 vehicles are crossing the border in both directions each day. And what that has led to is a community that is facing real issues about air pollution, air quality, while also being largely underserved by the greater whole of San Diego. If you look at that previous map, we would like to say that tax money flows north on that map and not south. And um, so San Ysidro is reliant on the larger city for services and infrastructure and revenue, um, that's not always proportional, while it's also absorbing these forces from the border, both good and bad. Um, uh, things like mass migration north, and then air pollution, as I mentioned before. But it's a very self-reliant community. It's a very engaged community of multi-generational, largely Hispanic families. And the population generally is pretty young. There's some statistics here um, on the side. Median age of 31, almost half the population is foreign born, with Mexico being the primary country of origin, which gave us a lot of rich information about this project. But it's also classified as a disadvantaged community. 21% of the population lives below the excuse me, federal poverty level. And it's an AB 617 community, which is relates to air pollution and um, access to resources around air pollution. So and it's bordered by three major freeways on top of the access, the port of entry in San Ysidro. And so this is where our client Casa Familiar sort of comes in. They they have so Casa Familiar is a woman-led, largely Latinx social innovation nonprofit, and they cultivate and nurture this community through providing support services, education, immigration, access, documentation, food assistance, job placement, and they've taken on this environmental justice movement as a really as a reaction to the quality of air in the neighborhood. And so they've sort of taken it upon themselves to really do a lot. Environmental justice, like I said, was a big initiative. Sort of these like guerrilla, largely, raising money and doing these initiatives that don't require big bureaucratic approvals, such as urban greening, planting fruit trees throughout the neighborhood, educating the neighborhood on renewable resources, trying to reinforce public transportation. And they've also engaged with San Diego State University and the University of Washington to do air pollution monitoring in this area, and have shown that it's far worse than what is tracked at the state level. And so we are working with CASA on I don't know if you can see my pointer, but on these two sites up at the top, sort of center, and down at the bottom, on a master plan for a community land trust. And through that engagement, Lisa came to us. Lisa Cuestas is the CEO for Casa Familiar. She came to us with this vacant lot that you see here in the middle. I'll go into this map a little more, but with this vacant lot and this vision that started as wanting to create this climate resiliency park that would provide EV charging for the entire community and for their fleet of electrified vehicles, a place to gather and really a demonstration piece to address air quality through landscape mainly. And so it started with this idea of a park. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, it was funny because the way they got us interested on our side was we heard climate resiliency park, and we thought, "Ooh, that's really cool." And then we were envisioning giant groves of plants that were filtering the air and stuff. And then we found out it was a 7,000 square foot lot, and we're like, "Oh, okay, that's not going to work the way you think it's going to work." So then the conversation kept going, and what we found was that they were really pushing for solar charging so that they could have electric cars for the neighborhood to use, or electric charging for the neighborhood to use. And then it was a chance to kind of talk the client through their expectations about what was realistic and what really made sense. Because we said, well, if you're really starting to provide the level of service that will treat everyone in the neighborhood, you're looking at building a parking lot. If you want to do electric charging for everyone, you're going to end up with a parking lot with solar panels. Is that really what you want when so many people already drive and there's a transit site where the trolley goes right there? And so the wheels started turning, and it gave us an opportunity to redefine the program and kind of shift it towards a different direction, because we had neither the scale to change the microclimate of the air quality, and the funds that they were hoping to use for electric car charging were really going to take them in the wrong direction in terms of creating green space. So the program ended up changing.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give an overview of sort of what's happening within this within a portion of the larger community of San Ysidro, and these are all initiatives that are mostly headed up by Casa Familiar, and it starts with this idea of this cultural corridor that is represented here with this yellow line. It's repurposing an alley basically for a pedestrian walk that the neighbors can activate at the edges themselves, whether they densify it with ADUs, murals, having events along it, and it's sort of in partnership with the city is sort of taking back this alley, and what that creates is this spine or connection between these two lots that I mentioned before that are community land trusts for about 100 units. And it connects the rest of their projects too. So the projects in blue are CASA owned and run properties. And what's nice, or what's being layered into this also, is a continuation of the Bayshore Bikeway, for those that are in San Diego, is being continued down to the border. The transit site noted here is a trolley that goes to the border, back north up to north of downtown. And so our project happens sort of in the middle of all of this. And with that, it's the first one that it's the first project to go in. And so it's it's acting as sort of the connector of what happens in the future. So some quick images about what the cultural corridor can be. These were done previous to us engaging with them, but some ideas about the cultural corridor, and then some master planning that we did with Casa Familiar around those two sites, and the community land trust. And so I think this is where the story of La Semilla begins for us. We were given that high level brief from Lisa about what this project should be, but there was no program, has been mentioned, and there was no budget. It really was sort of this like dream commission that everyone talks about. What we needed to do was conceptualize this project, get a cost estimate for it, and whatever that number ends up being, CASA was going to get those funds by getting it into the state, getting it to the governor's office to get included in the state budget for that year. I think this was 2022. And so we only had a couple months to do this. We started with 3 community meetings, asking, very basic questions like what do you need? What are the opportunities around this site? What are the limitations? And the things that we heard were very, it gave us a great understanding that this thing is not this flashy big project in the middle of a town. It's a very humble, responsive project. And then we tried to define like what La Semilla is even going to be. And we came up with all these ideas: a community center, a social hub, demonstration project, a connector. And I don't know that we've all settled on this, but I settled on just calling it a climate resiliency community hub. It doesn't have a defined name in project typologies. But what's most important is what we got out of this was that this wasn't a park. This needed to be more than a park. It really was this community hub. It really was this connector space, and we wanted to establish a set of values, so that this space could evolve as the community uses it. And so just a few values that we sort of settled on. Oops, sorry, let me go back. We wanted to educate the community on recognizable and sustainable building techniques. That was really critical to this. We'll talk about more. And we wanted with the goal of empowering the community to build on their own property, to be able to create multi-generational homes, and thus building generational wealth, through real estate development at a very micro level. And then also through this project, hopefully the community becomes stewards for San Ysidro as development sort of pushes its way into this community, to keep them to a high standard of both sustainability and design, by being able to point to La Semilla and say, this is where you need to be if you want to build in our community. And then also making it known or apparent, ways in which the community can tackle environmental justice issues at a community level. And what sort of settled out of that, those set of values, was this program that we defined, which was a plaza that connected to the cultural corridor on the west side, a food forest. There was a requirement that there was this was not a community garden. This was something that would be tended to and be an education piece, and not a place where you come and grow, tomatoes and peppers. So with that food forest came a caretakers unit that would facilitate that program. And then we layered in a micromobility hub to be able to connect the neighborhood to the transit stop or to the commercial sides of San Ysidro. A greenhouse that both will act as a greenhouse, but will also be a place where CASA can hold fundraisers or bring donors, kind of a celebratory space. and then the community center, and then as been mentioned earlier, this EV charging hub, both for CASA and also potentially subsidized for the neighborhood. So as we worked through this concept design in this first phase, just some imagery as we sort of worked through this.
Brandon, do you mind
Yeah,
if I just mentioned something on the previous one?
yeah.
One of the things that was interesting about trying to pin down the program was there was a bit of a process of elimination as well. There were certain things that people were asking for, like the program was just as much defined as things that we couldn't do that people were asking for. It's funny how open people think when they're not concerned about zoning and stuff like that. People were asking for like a little grocery store or a little
Mhm.
drugstore because those are things that are missing in their community. So from an urban design standpoint, that was exciting to me to see this nascent demand for more mixed use kind of land use in a neighborhood that's not really zoned for that. People really crave that access. So we wanted to stretch the program as much as we can to reach out towards them and their needs, but within the constraints that we had from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, this isn't a residentially zoned property, so we're not doing any conditional use permit. Everything is by right, but it did sort of put those constraints on what we call something, or what it could be. Um, and then going back to precedent of what these spaces could be, textures and materials, both building, site. There was a large conversation around connecting this back to the community's places of origin. As I mentioned, a lot of them come from Mexico, and we're not overtly recreating a building from Central America, but we're finding it in textures and colors and scale. So
Can we go back
um,
one? The there's something something to I think the key elements of what we were looking at were in terms of scale, we wanted to provide something that felt kind of domestic and fit into the building types that are in the neighborhood. So we knew that we were going to have some sort of building volume for like main program. And then we knew that we wanted some sort of little tower, like this idea of a little wizard tower kind of a thing, a beacon for the neighborhood. And then for practical reasons, we knew that there was going to be some sort of membrane on top that would be where all the solar panels would go. So in our early iterations, we played with those three physical elements and then the grade change as the bones of the different partie that we were investigating.
still in my slides later for later, Ben.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm
Thanks for
just
letting me
joking.
know. Thanks for letting me know.
No, you're fine. Sorry, let me go back. Okay. And so we settled on this was essentially what went out as the concept package, all those elements that we just listed in the program, and what Ben mentioned. A lot of ideas packed in this. And we sent it off to the governor's office, and we had support from state senators, and it did not make it in the budget. And so that leads us to sort of the next sort of entry in this project of was this the end or the beginning of La Semilla? It spoiler alert, it was not the end. It was the beginning. Lisa pressed ahead, and they secured private donations that funded pre-development costs, and they assembled a team to start applying for grants, specifically a grant from the Strategic Growth Council for climate resiliency centers in the state of California. These are just this was our abbreviated version of the concept package, just to share a few stats: the 7,000 square foot lot, the different square foot proportion of square footages, 2,000 of building, and then another 1,000 square feet of cultural plaza connected to the corridor, a 1,700 square foot food forest. So 81% of the site was outdoor space, charging stations, solar photovoltaic, construction costs, pre-development costs. This was sort of our launching point into into this next phase when Lisa called and said, we have these donation money, we have pre-development money, let's move ahead. So that leads us into the next version, the next iteration of design, I suppose.
So the idea for La Semilla is to kind of have a similar effect that a climate resiliency park or a climate mitigation park would have in terms of fixing air quality, providing a didactic space for people to learn about natural systems and ecosystem services and stuff like that. However, because of the lack of scale, in order to do that, the metaphor that we came on, it was just like dinner with my dad one night, and this idea that this is a seed. So the seed doesn't feed you, but the seed has the power to scale up and feed many people and produce more seeds that then get spread. So this idea that we're going to be showcasing stuff on this site and bringing people into it in such a natural way. But natural, I mean like such a casual way. Like they're going to come here for a quinceañera, or they're going to come here for I'll work through that later. They're going to come here for some sort of social reason, and then they're going to get exposed to new ideas that will then get implemented in other places where people can control space. So the anatomy of this, starting from the left-hand side of the screen, we've got this thing called Cypress Plaza, and it's an open space that comes off of the alley. Later on, I'll point it out again. What it does is actually it's where the cultural corridor, which is one alley, and another alley intersect. And so what we did is we pulled back a little bit there and created a little bit of space so you can have something like a civic aspect to this. In that sense, I mean something that's like a little bit harder materials, something that's rugged, like an urban plaza for use, for lots of people to get together. Beverages can be spilled, people can dance, and it's no problem. Then the tower right behind that is called El Nido, which means the nest. And so that's the idea that it's based on, Jane Jacobs' Eyes on the Street. We don't want fences, we don't want cameras, we don't want big, crazy lights. So how do we remedy that and provide security and provide programming? Let's have someone live on the site. So it originally started as like a one-bedroom unit, and then it evolved into, hey, well, maybe a family could live here, and Brandon will explain that more later. That structure has a garage at the ground floor that opens up and could host a micromobility fleet or micro retail. And then behind that, there's the space for the food forest. Maybe not everyone's familiar with the food forest, but the idea is instead of feeding people through monoculture, we feed people by creating a layering of different food systems that work together. So everything from ground roots and tubers to bushes to trees that bear nuts and fruit, and sections of it that can be devoted towards vegetables and tomatoes and things like that. And then there's another layer to it, which is all the cycling of compost and other nutrients that keep this food forest going along. When you have a wide variety of plants, they have nutrients in different concentrations, and they can support each other in this kind of dynamic ecosystem. So food forest is small and mighty, just kind of like this site. The next thing is La Estancia, which is our general purpose building. It's got a bathroom. It's got this big, nice space inside. It's framed in CLT. Off on one side of it, you can see that jewel box, and the point of that is to have it looks like a greenhouse. It'll probably be a conditioned space. I think it is a conditioned space, but it's also a place where Lisa from Casa Familiar can go take people in there, donors, and have fancy dinners and court them and have it and show them that this isn't a low budget operation. This is a powerful nonprofit that can really change people's lives and change communities. The estancia can be for quinceañeras. It can be an affordable wedding venue. The idea is to have something that's accessible to people in the neighborhood and is really just a beautiful place that people want to be seen it. They want to take photos. They want to remember that place. And then at the very front, there's a parking grove, got a few fruit trees, some car chargers. That is evolving right now into a bit of a plaza space, more of a pocket garden in the back with a plaza on the side. But we can explain that more later.
Yeah.
So I was just going to tell you a few quick little vignettes about what could happen here using these renderings. Um, One thing that could happen at La Semilla is on a summer evening, you have a concert out in the food forest or on the Cypress Plaza, and people walk from across the street from the rec center and from the chain of parks that are the spine of this neighborhood. They can kind of funnel from this chain of parks into this space and come here for an art gallery or music in the park. The next one. The other thing this could serve as is an after school kind of place, especially for high schoolers and middle schoolers. So people will, because it's on axis with another alley that I was mentioning before, this actually forms a shortcut. So you can get out of school and cut through this space to get to the rec center, to get to the park. But also, as you're walking by, you might see a friend of yours taking a permaculture class in the food forest. You can imagine this greenhouse that's not just an entertaining space, but it's also a functioning greenhouse as a place where you've got starts and seedlings, you've got the warming mats, and people are mixing coconut coir and preparing soil for being double dug into the ground. Let's go one more. And then with the overall space, you can imagine that you can have a vendor fair on a weekend with locals selling goods, people assembling to play music and play games. So it just becomes a social scene, a place where people can come together for one reason, and then they run into a neighbor who's there for a different reason, and that's where the color of life is.
So that brings us to our next section that we're calling strategies and implementation. So how did this thing become a reality, or is becoming a reality? It's very much in progress. We started with environmental strategies. As we developed the program, we also developed environmental strategies. We looked to certification programs. We dabbled in them, but we decided that we don't need to chase a specific certification, but we do need to be held to those standards through this project, while also making sure that all of these strategies were recognizable and digestible to the community. It doesn't do any good to do this really esoteric, system if someone can't point to it and go, oh, I can capture rainwater on my side, or I can, solar PV, which is pretty well known, or I could build a trellis to mitigate, sun in my house. Or so everything was sort of built around these environmental strategies, from the EV charging stations, trellis and shade that serves a purpose of another opportunity to provide a food for the community. And then down to deciding, because we got to determine the budget and the approach to this, we did decide to do mass timber, and really eliminate as much concrete from the site. This is not a challenging thing to do. We are in the very southwest corner of the country, surrounded by desert, so access to materials in a responsible way, sourcing those is very tricky, including mass timber. But we thought it was really important to do that. Also because the community can come and watch this thing be built. This thing could be erected in a couple days. Whether they want to build an ADU out of mass timber, I would love to help them do that. Maybe not, but it gives them this recognizable thing as it's developed. And so we and also recognizable shapes, I think, which have been touched on, of, well, maybe my ADU can look like that, or maybe my house can look like that, but these aren't they're neither of those, but being very mindful of what this thing represents to the community. And so we can look at this thing really in layers, right? So starting from the sun, powering the solar photovoltaics, a 23 kilowatt system that's offsetting all the power of the building, as well as about 50% of the charging, which then is charging the mobility fleet, whether it's a car being parked there or it's the micromobility fleet that Casa is partnering to have in this garage space of El Nido. We can start to track how these environmental strategies work through the building and get dispersed out to the community. The same with structure. I mentioned the mass timber, keeping that connection to nature, exposing the structure so someone can come in and point to something in this building and understand how this thing was constructed. And then the other layer obviously is water. It is San Diego. It doesn't get a ton of water, but what we can capture between roof runoff, site water runoff, and gray water, we are capturing in cisterns, purposely put above ground. We actually have a mix. We have 3 different types of cisterns: underground, wall mounted, and this kind of tower cistern that goes under El Nido, that captures the water and moves down to provide irrigation for the site.
And from the cisterns, we get out into the landscape. That's where there was a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration between architecture, civil, and landscape, was figuring out, okay, well, civil is used to talking about what to do once water hits the ground. Landscape, I'm used to talking about what to do with water in terms of getting it to the plants. And then architecture is dealing with like the roof surfaces and connecting all these systems together with MEP. So we had a lot of conversations as a group to figure this out. So then the water goes through these cisterns and it goes through drip feed, and through the drip feed goes to all the plants. Some of it might get recollected as groundwater recapture. So there's just there's all these different relationships. I don't know if you want to show the next one.
Yeah.
But we had to create these flow charts just so we could wrap our brains around the different circuitous route that water was taking throughout the site. For different reasons too, because part of it is if you have water that's coming from like gray water, it can't get sprayed to irrigate crops. It has to be delivered via drip and after a filtering process. But if it's rain, and it can go to a rain barrel and it's considered clean if it comes off of a roof. So there's all these different ways that it wasn't like any 2 drops were the same. The 2 drops of water were different depending on how they got to us. So it was definitely a puzzle to figure out.
I don't remember how much water use we were offsetting, mainly because it doesn't get much rain on a yearly average. But we did get to make this decision to put these kind of large, kind of expensive infrastructure pieces into the site as a means to at least offset or sort of reinforce this idea of a food forest on the site without completely relying on domestic water to power that.
I also thought it was interesting that it wasn't a clean cut set of calculations that we did to figure things out. There was a lot of guesstimating. There was a lot of back and forth. This still isn't, to the best of the knowledge of the team, it still isn't something that you can just crank out a spreadsheet on. Just because our climate is changing, the weather events in San Diego seem to get more severe and more frequent. But there's also large stretches of the year when we don't get a drop of rain from the sky. So we were all kind of seeing how this whole thing was going to work out.
Yeah, I think that goes into the story also of this project of how it gets used and how it evolves and how the programming reinforces or dictates the evolution of this project, which is really exciting to us. It's very much not a finished project when it's built.
Yeah.
And
the flexibilities, how we're going to deal with the uncertainty.
And so I think maybe that's a good segue into how this is being implemented. We are almost through permitting on this. We are deep into the realities of these ideas and how as designers, engineers, how these things actually happen on a site. This project is very much operating on the margins of what the code of how the code can be applied to this site. We mentioned it's a residential site. We have a mix of uses, um, and also how the program has evolved as Casa Familiar has understood what this project could be. Ben mentioned the studio that became a 2-bedroom unit, when there wasn't really any more footprint for that to happen on the site. So how we expanded that unit, um, and sort of how the site has evolved into more of an experience. We think Ben was mentioning the pass through where you could get from, if you can see my mouse, from Cypress Plaza or Cypress Drive on the left out to West Park on the right, has now become a series of ramps where you enter in the northwest corner and you move through the food forest on this organic material called, I think it's Roby block. Has that right, Ben?
Mhm.
And then onto another ramp that brings you up to this plaza off of La Estancia. And so looking at how the site terraces and starts to create, more individual spaces within the collective, um, and a more formal plaza off of the greenhouse. And then there's these harsh realities of like there's this bureaucratic means, that no matter how amazing you make this project sound to them and how on board they are, and we do have amazing support from the city of San Diego, from the mayor's office to achieve this project. When you get to the nuts and bolts of it, some things they just won't allow us to do. Um, and so navigating that has proven, a mix of success and changes. The biggest one is the parking grove is no longer a parking grove. We cannot park 5 cars across the front of a site, even if they were car charging stations for the entire community at a subsidized price by a private nonprofit. Um, there's nothing in the code that allows that. Transformers, when you have this big infrastructure of EV, and also I forgot to mention battery backup. So part of this is a climate resiliency center. So it will be a place where it'll be a staging place in the event of a climate emergency. So battery backup, emergency supplies, these things that, as I was saying, have evolved into the program as they've looked for funding sources, but also understood what this space can be. And so these big infrastructure pieces, like where does the transformer go? What are the requirements around spacing for that, and how it starts to disrupt our planned program spaces. Even being very proactive with this on the front end, we're still facing these. And these other big infrastructure pieces like cisterns and how they connect. So really getting all that tied in while still maintaining this larger idea, while also dealing with a regulatory agency that has to follow rules, even though they like the project, has been an exciting challenge, but also, as we all know, as architects and people that have maybe built stuff, is still a challenge. And so the other piece to this, that we're really excited about, is arts programming. And this goes back to a means to connect the site to the community, to people in the community's places of origin or places they remember as kids, growing up. But also Casa Familiar has a really robust arts program, really amazing cross-border arts program that we wanted to celebrate on this site, and really give this building back. Almost the buildings really are just a backdrop for what happens on the site, is the way I like to think about it. They very much come secondary to the activation of the site and then layering on this arts program. And so these were ideas that we presented to Casa, tile work, murals, which you saw in some of the renderings, these big surfaces where projections could happen if there's a movie or a festival, teaching walls where the caretaker for the food forest could explain to kids how permaculture works in a diagram, or all these opportunities for sculpture and wayfinding through without using overtly using signage. Really trying to find these opportunities throughout the site, and knowing that this is going to change. So in 10 years, these murals may be something totally different, which is really exciting to us, and goes back to that thing we keep saying of what is this project going to be at, at the end of it. And then we just wanted to throw in most of the renderings are the older version. This is where we are today. This is the expansion, which you saw in the previous AXO of what El Nido has become. Much more robust building, but provided some other opportunities around more surfaces, etc. And a couple studies of what the inside looks like for Estancia, the first two, the main gathering space, and then the greenhouse. So final chapter, and doing pretty good on time here. So we thought we'd end with what's next, what's happening now, because this was an unbuilt project. And at a logistical timeline level, the project was awarded an $8.5 million implementation grant from the Strategic Growth Council just about a month ago. That was part of this larger initiative for climate resiliency centers around the country. That money is not the cost to build this project. That money also funds programming and operations for a couple years beyond the end of construction. That also includes land acquisition and pre-development costs. So this is by no means a $8 million construction project. We're very mindful of the cost of this thing, even though we are injecting a lot of things that come at a premium. Contractors are interviewing for the project currently, and a groundbreaking has been scheduled for the end of July. And Wild Willow has been selected. They're another local nonprofit. They will be the facilitator and caretaker for the food forest. And then I think I mentioned earlier, CASA has partnered with a micromobility provider or operator to provide shuttles and hopefully bikes in that ground floor of El Nido that can be used and subsidized or potentially even free to the city, to the community of San Ysidro. Ben.
So at the end, we're still trying to answer what is La Semilla, because every time we get together to push the project further for the next step, we find ourselves having a lot of these conversations where we're coming back to home base and reestablishing what this project is supposed to do and what it means. And we end up falling kind of on the same touchstone, which is that this project is supposed to run a bunch of different software on it. You're supposed to be able to do events. You're supposed to be able to do education. You're supposed to, show an aspirational example of what the neighborhood could be. And it's all supposed to change over time and kind of update the software over time. So we really started to see this as a piece of hardware, like something like this, where it's a bunch of different things in one. You're no longer carrying, your CD player and film camera and remote for the TV and all that. Just kind of one thing that does a lot of different functions and reflects, the apps that you have loaded on the phone reflect how you live and the things that are important to you. And so we look at this as some sort of prototype that could be deployed in different places, and the software that gets run on it really just reflects on what people need, what makes sense for that neighborhood. So I think the things that really would kind of move with it from place to place, like what's the real hardware there? It has something to do with the scale of the building volumes, its approach to the site, and the way it draws people in and through the site. I think those are the main ingredients of La Semilla. That's our hardware that can run all these different software.
Just wanted to end with a thanks. Ben and I are presenting this, but we are by no means the team on this. Casa Familiar, our client, the community of San Ysidro, the city of San Diego, Our engineers, KPFF, Latitude 33, Civil, Introba. Noctiluca is our lighting company. Macola, of course, with Ben, Coming Group. Our internal teams, who I think maybe are watching. I hope. And then lastly, AI Oregon for allowing us to present this project. So with that, I think we'll open it up for Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing. Looks like there's some things in the chat. See how we facilitate this. Cool. Comments, not questions. If there's questions, either
There's a
do that
question
little
about
hand
budget
raise. Oh,
in the
okay.
chat.
Oh, yeah. What is the target budget for this project to ensure the overall community aspirations can be met? That's an interesting question at an interesting time, because I know that I know you're on here somewhere, Patrick. I know a few of the contractors currently bidding this project through an RFP process are on this call. But we mentioned that $8.5 million grant. Less than half of that number is allocated for construction. The numbers that we are not totally sure of, and why that extra money was put into the grant, was to fund the programming. You could finish this building and still want the funding to operate it, to expand the programming. So that will facilitate that, I think, for I want to say 2 or 3 years, and then CASA is really a fundraising, has a lot of backing through fundraising and private donors that will hopefully keep those activities or programming going. So
I want to mention something
yeah.
about the budget. I think we have an interesting challenge here because we have to walk a fine line. On one side, we want to make this place look incredibly elevated and have beautiful materials and beautiful detailing, because it's really going to be the front face for Casa. And we also want to give the neighborhood something gorgeous that they deserve. At the same time, we don't want things to go so far that people don't see it as deployable. We still want people to be able to look at the cistern or at the solar panels, and they're presented in such a way that they say, "Oh, I could probably do that at my place." And so we're trying to do both at the same time.
Yep. If anyone has questions, John has one in the chat. Why mass timber? Would concrete block adobe be more appropriate given the location? The decision with mass timber was largely due to the advantages of it, with carbon sequestration, natural materials, not pulling gypsum out of the earth for concrete. We do have a little concrete on the site that's a very functional part of the site. The site walls were hopefully going to move to rammed earth instead of concrete, but we did have these conversations early on about rammed earth buildings or even adobe, and I think we settled on mass timber because it one was, I mean, at a very basic level, was probably the easiest path structurally in the state of California to get through, but also hasn't been done. So bringing awareness to it as a product, but also just the way it finishes and the way the feeling it gives back to the space when it's done.
I think from my personal standpoint, I was really excited about doing rammed earth or adobe or straw bale. And one side of my brain thinks that is the future for Southern California, because it can be all sourced locally and it's not depleting forests up north. But on the other hand, one of our key mandates here was to work with stuff that is like, people know fiber, like they know microlam, they know a lot of the components of mass timber. They also are not familiar so much with adobe, unfortunately, down here. So I think we were a little concerned that if we ended up doing like a James Hubble kind of house, people would just kind of dismiss the whole thing as like, okay, well, this is some weird pilot project. Like this doesn't relate to me and my house. Or so the mass timber allowed us to maintain kind of domestic design language that's relatable and it makes sense for people.
There's a few more minutes. Any other questions? Feel free to just chime in or do that little hand raise thing or going once. Okay. Okay. Thank you everyone for your time. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And hopefully we'll see this thing in built form as an award maybe in a couple years.
That would be awesome. Thank you both so much. It was a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.